Academy Fellow in the Department of Education Reform. So this is one of our lectures in our great series that we have here. We have two more lectures this semester. The next one is Matthew Ladner on November 18th. So we hope that you'll be able to make that lecture as well. Make sure you go to our website and RSVP so we have enough of these sandwiches for everyone. Today we have the great pleasure of welcoming Tim Sass to our lecture series. And if you checked our website, you may have noticed that Tim Sass worked at Florida State, which he did for 21 years. But if you call there, he will no longer answer because he has been enticed to Georgia State University. They made an offer he just couldn't refuse. And so he's now at Georgia State. He is a distinguished research professor in the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies and the Department of Economics. He's been there 3 months. He specializes in economics of education and applied microeconomics. And recently he's been doing a lot of research in teacher quality and in evaluating the effectiveness of education programs. He has 3 papers which you can find links to on our website that he'll be discussing today. So would you please welcome Tim Sass to our lecture series.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's speaking like royalty. It's been real fun. Today I'm actually going to smush 3 papers into one to try and look at a couple questions. Do teacher prep programs produce superior teachers, and are some programs better than others? In case I don't get through all the slides, the answers appear to be no, except maybe special education, and it's really hard to tell. But let me hopefully fill in a little more. So, a little background. As most you know that it's now acknowledged that teacher quality, no surprise to educators, but teacher quality is the primary determinant of student achievement. And the problem is, though, we don't know really much about what makes a good teacher. We know teachers are important. It seems like the first few years of experience matters, but other than that, not much. At least we can measure. So, perhaps simply good teachers are born, not made. And maybe what's most relevant is on-the-job training. And we do know for a number of studies that, at least on observable credentials, people entering preparation programs are of lower quality. Mostly people attribute this to expanded labor market opportunities for women. So you look at the pool of education candidates in, say, the 60s, looks very different in terms of GPA, college ranking, prestige, and so forth. In the current policy context, there's a number of things pushing on teacher preparation programs. One is the expansion of so-called alternative certification programs, different possible routes into teaching other than going through a traditional teacher prep program. Also, Race to the Top, one of the components requires that states at least report information on the effectiveness of their graduates. So look at report statistics on the test scores of the students those graduates teach. And then just a few weeks ago, the Obama administration came out with the new Our Future is Our Teachers plan that also calls for reporting outcomes to students by teacher prep programs and will provide aid to states that commit to a, quote, rigorous system for teacher preparation program accountability. So they hopefully touch on 3 papers I've done looking at related issues. The first looks at the issue of alternative certification. So how do alternatively certified teachers compare in terms of their effectiveness to traditionally prepared teachers? And just to give you a little background, traditional program means typically the student gets a bachelor's degree in education through a 4-year university. They then have to pass a set of certification exams to be licensed to teach. Alternative pathways vary quite a bit. Typically, they still require a bachelor's degree, but not in education. They may have some limited coursework requirement in education. They still have to pass the state certification exams. And in some cases, like in New York with the Teaching Fellows and Teach for America, they may be required to take additional coursework after they start teaching. If we think about, well, why do we have restrictions on who can teach and how they have to be prepared, you can look to the economics literature on professional licensure. There's sort of two broad views of professional licensure. One is a information and quality story. And so, why have a Food and Drug Administration, for example, that consumers may be ill-informed and the consequences of getting low quality may be significant. And so by having some minimum standard, you avoid consumers being left with low-quality goods. The alternative view is sort of a public choice kind of view that it may be that professional groups use the regulatory mechanism to essentially restrict competition and benefit their members. So essentially creating ways to increase the cost of entry into the profession. The evidence on alternative certification is not huge. There's a handful of recent papers, a couple using data from New York, Don Boyd, Susanna Loeb, Jim Wyckoff and that group, and then Tom Kane, Joan Rockoff, and Doug Steger have looked at alternative certification in New York. There, the two primary alternate routes are what's called a Teaching Fellows program and then Teach for America. And the upshot there is that the alternatively certified teachers seem to do as well or perhaps better than traditionally prepared teachers. Particularly with respect to TFA, it appears that TFA teachers do a bit better in teaching math. The downside, though, with TFA is that many TFA teachers leave after their 2-year commitment. So there's a trade-off between potentially higher achievement gains, but then they partly are fully offset by reduced experience because you have more churning of the teacher force. Paper by Zayu Zhu, Jane Hadaway, and Colin Taylor looked at TFA in North Carolina high schools. In fact, had similar results that on average, the TFA teachers were more effective in promoting student achievement, and particularly in science and math. And that perhaps is not surprising where in upper grades, where content knowledge matters more, TFA teachers are coming primarily from elite universities, have very strong academic credentials, so that would sort of be consistent with that evidence. There's also been a couple of experimental studies by folks at Mathematica. One looked specifically at TFA and found that, once again, they seem to outperform traditionally prepared teachers in math, but no difference in reading achievement. And then the other study by Constantine and colleagues looked at other less restrictive alternative certification programs. So I mean, TFA is kind of a different animal in the sense that TFA recruits from elite colleges and universities. They're getting very academically proficient people come in, and then they're targeting the teachers mainly to urban areas of high poverty. Constantine looked at more general alt-cert programs and basically found no difference between the alternatively certified teachers and traditionally prepared teachers. One caveat is that it turns out that the alt-cert programs they looked at had The teachers had large amount of coursework in education. It's not clear that they were all that different than traditionally prepared teachers. The work I've done is been in Florida, where they actually have a whole menu of ways in which people can become certified to teach. So in addition to traditional Florida teacher preparation programs at universities, there's a district alternative certification program that doesn't require an education degree. There's no special recruitment like TFA. They still have to pass the certification exam. Another is what's referred to as course analysis, or sometimes the cafeteria route, in that basically requires a handful of education courses, and could be that you majored in something else or picked up a course here and there. As long as you have that handful of courses and meet the other certification requirements, you can teach. Then, of course, Florida until recently was a net importer of teachers. Before 2008, we were growing in population, and with the class size initiative, hiring lots of teachers. A significant proportion of teachers were either coming as new grads from out-of-state prep programs, or teachers that were certified in another state moving to Florida. In addition, there's also a number of people that become teachers to the ABCTE program. That's the American Board for Certification of Teacher Excellence, which essentially just requires that people pass a test. There's no minimum coursework requirement. And then two other routes. Florida started this thing called Education Preparation Institutes. Basically, it's a 2-semester program, primarily at community colleges, where you have to take coursework that does not count toward any degree. So it's not like you get an AA degree or something like that. And then after that, sit for the certification exams. And lastly, college teaching experience. So many of you could teach in Florida right now. If you've been teaching courses here at the University of Arkansas, you could step right into a Florida classroom. And here just shows kind of the distribution. As you can see, big numbers from out-of-state prep programs and teachers certified in other states that came to Florida. This course analysis is kind of a hodgepodge. So a lot of people fall into that. And the various alternative certification programs, this data is through 2006, are fairly small and growing. And here's just some descriptive statistics comparing teachers from different routes. So on the left are the traditionally prepared teachers, and we have various measures of how competitive the college they went to, whether they passed the general knowledge exams required of teachers on the first try, average SAT score, and if you look at the two largest alternative programs, the Educator Preparation Institutes and the District Alt Cert, they're significantly different in almost every dimension. So, coming from more competitive colleges, they're more likely to pass the general knowledge exams in the first try. They tend to be more white. They tend to be more male, and they have significantly higher SAT scores. You also see, even though the ABCT sample is pretty small, you do see significant differences in the SAT scores and the demographics of people that are going through this ABCT. And here, it's the same numbers for elementary certification. So you might argue that, well, alternate route teachers, if it's a second career, etc., maybe more of them are going to high school, so they may look different than traditional teacher prep graduates, most of which are getting certified in elementary ed. But even if you just look at elementary ed, most of the differences are still there, particularly with respect to performance on exams. Interesting that if you look at all these alternative routes, their coursework isn't tremendously different than traditionally prepared teachers. Now, part of that is because I'm including in here this course analysis, so somebody could have taken almost all the courses for an education major and then didn't finish it for some reason, and then get into teaching through the course analysis route. But I think this points out that if you're going to look at alternative certification, you've got to be clear on what it is you're defining as alt-cert. A lot of things that get called alternative certification look a whole lot like a traditional teacher preparation program. Here's looking at the major of their first bachelor's degree. So, not surprising, most traditionally prepared teachers, their first degree was in education. You get a smattering that got a second degree in education. But then you look at some of the other routes, much different proportions. Look at, for example, the district alt-cert. The education majors were too small to report. The most popular major here are English majors. And then here we're looking at the modal major by certification level and pathway in teaching. So you can see that in many cases, elementary ed is the typical major, even in programs other than the traditional pathway. But if you look at some of the alternative certification, like the district alt-cert here, interesting that people going that route and getting a credential in high school math, most of them actually majored in math. And likewise, those going in biology, majored in biology. As opposed to, if you look at math and science teachers that were traditionally prepared, they're going the math education route or science education route. Then did a so-called value-added analysis, trying to look at what are the impacts of teachers on student achievement, broken down by their pathway to teaching. And actually in the midst of updating this data, so that this analysis only goes through 0405. Bother with all the Greek here. For those of you who've done work in this area, you've seen it all before. And for those of you who don't, you probably don't want to see it. So. But let me give you what the results look like. So I got all these colored boxes here indicating various levels of statistical significance. But if you focus in on this top row, which is the district alternative certification, which is the largest alternative certification program, we're finding that there are some significant differences that depending on whether you cluster your standard errors, adjust for correlation in the errors of people in the same pathway or not. It may or may not be significant, but or at least in some cases, depending on the different value-added model, in some cases we're getting a significant positive effect. In math, the impacts are all positive, all fairly small, 2-3% of a standard deviation. These are standard deviation units. Reading, we're not finding much. Here, broken it down by elementary and middle school. And once again, the effects are small, mainly on the math side. Yes?
So you said cluster, I mean, you mentioned cluster. Cluster at what level?
Okay, so clustering at the pathway level. So, we have these 8 different pathways in the teaching, so clustering the standard errors within pathways. So, basically what we find in terms of alternative certification, that the alternatively certified teachers in Florida, at least, look different in terms of their observable credentials. They tend to come from more competitive colleges. They're less likely to be minorities, more likely to be male, do better on certification exams, have higher SAT scores. You saw in terms of coursework, not as big a difference as you might expect. Their majors differ. Obviously much less likely to be education majors, more likely to have a major in the discipline they're teaching. And we do find some small effects, about 3% of a standard deviation, may or may not be statistically significant. And where we do find some possible differences, they seem to be more on the math side. So findings that are roughly consistent with what people found elsewhere, that alternative certification routes do seem to be an avenue for people to enter teaching and with different credentials. And they seem to be no worse than traditionally prepared teachers, and maybe in math and science, maybe a tad better. So if you just look at that, you might say, well, why do we need colleges of education? Or at least why do we need teacher preparation programs? One caveat is that done some work on special education. There's a paper, what makes special education teachers special. And there we're finding that some of the things we thought we knew about general ed teachers may not apply to special ed. And in particular, their training and the nature of that training may matter. Now, trying to do this teacher effectiveness or value-added work in special education is really tough because all the sort of selection problems that you encounter in the general education are just magnified in special ed. And other issues in test scaling and so forth are also problematic. In special ed, often kids have multiple teachers. You have to be concerned with that. They may be at the low end of the test score distribution, so you have to worry about scaling. And, of course, big selection issues that kids in special education don't get randomly assigned to teachers for good reasons. But.
Can I interrupt before you get into the special ed, just to address the conclusion you just said about ed schools? So, actually, if I'm seeing your evidence correctly, you're actually affirming the value of ed schools by saying that ed schools on average are taking in students with lower ability, and yet they perform about as well, which would suggest that ed schools bring those students up to a higher level of performance, right? Or that's how you could interpret that. So that we would have to know how those students would do had they not gone through an ed school, right?
Yeah, and we. We weren't controlling for, say, college entrance exam scores and doing value-added analysis. So in other work I've done, that doesn't seem to matter. And you can also, talk about this hopefully in a couple minutes. Ed schools may have two functions. One is a screening function, and the other is a training function. So even if ed schools, didn't increase the human capital of their students at all, if they were least effective in choosing people that end up being good teachers, then they've done a service. So, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. I want you to finish. It's sometimes stated, and may not be true, that alternatively certified teachers turn over more. They don't stay as long in the classroom as traditionally prepared teachers. Is that captured? Is it controlled for? How do you find? Is it true? Are you able to tell them data? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Okay, so it's certainly true for TFA. I mean, very clear that a large proportion of TFA teachers leave after the 2-year commitment. We haven't done a specific analysis on Alt-Cert in Florida. I suspect we wouldn't find nearly as big a difference as we would for TFA, probably because opportunity costs look different and they don't have the sort of upfront 2-year commitment with sort of the tacit understanding that it's okay to leave after 2 years. But that certainly would be interesting to do, to see are these people that come into teaching through alternate routes, do they stay? One could control for experience and the value added. Yeah. So,
and do you?
we were just looking at early career. I'm sorry, let me take that. That's the other way back. No, we didn't. So, if you control for experience, it might be a different story. In fact, some of the studies at TFA. So if you control for experience, it does alter the story. Okay, so if you look at the literature for general education teachers, like I started off with saying, it looks like, well, good teachers are important, but you can't really identify much that is correlated with being a good teacher. In this work on special ed, what we did was look at students that either that were classified as special ed, so had an IEP, but were either enrolled in a general education course in the relevant subject, or a special ed course in the relevant subject, or one of each. They had more than one of each, we excluded them because the numbers were fairly small and it just gets too messy to try and figure out the impacts of the various teachers. And there's some work in the special ed literature looking at classroom practice, suggesting that there are differences between traditionally prepared and alternatively certified special ed teachers in terms of observable input into teaching and classroom practice. Here are just a few of the results. So we can see that we've broken out students into 3 groups. Ones that only are in regular ed courses, ones that are only in special ed courses, and ones that have both regular and special ed courses in the relevant subject area. And you can see that, and then we've broken out by the regular ed teacher and special ed teacher. And these are based on the course they're teaching, not their certification. So these are students that are taking a mix of courses. If their special ed teacher is certified in special ed, they seem to do somewhat better. Once again, not huge effects, about 2% of the standard deviation. On the reading side, we find more precise and somewhat stronger effects. So if your special ed teacher is certified in special ed, either if you only take special ed courses or you take a mix, then achievement gains are higher by about 2% of the standard deviation. Also, we find, but we don't find impacts for the regular ed teachers for those special ed students taking regular ed coursework. And then if we look at some of the specifics, we also find that the more exceptional child credits taken in college before becoming a teacher, also correlated with their effectiveness as a teacher, at least for those kids that are taking a mix of regular and special ed courses. For those only taking regular ed courses, we're actually finding a negative correlation if their first degree was in special ed. And one possibility here is that it may be that these are teachers that got burned out or decided that teaching special ed was not what they wanted to do. And so maybe we have some adverse selection here that people that got a degree in special ed and then end up teaching a regular ed course may have self-selected to do that.
Just to be clear, the coefficients you list here for the impacts are, those are effective sizes, but then in parentheses we have standard errors.
So those are T-stats actually.
T-stats.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
So like.
But the standard error is a unit on the test.
10%.
Okay.
Is the student achievement measured by the Florida state test, or?
Yes, we actually, during this time period, there were 2 tests in Florida. So there was the so-called Sunshine State Standards Test, which is the high-stakes test in Florida. It's based on the state curriculum. Then they also administered the Stanford 9 and later Stanford 10, the so-called norm reference test in Florida. And you get fairly similar results for these one test.
These are huge ends, right?
Yeah, so about 12% of kids in Florida are in special ed.
So these are just significant, like 25? Or?
Yeah, and some not even that. So the yellow is, well, 1 star is 10% and 2 stars is 5%.
Huge end, almost anything.
Well, yes and no. So it's a huge end in terms of number of students, but like with any teacher value-added measure, you have a limited number of students per teacher. So these are noisy measures. And once again, we find stronger effects on the reading side. Interesting. In fact, here's some fairly large, 60% of the standard deviation. And talking to folks in the special ed world, they're not particularly surprised by this, that they argue that there's big emphasis in special education training on reading preparation, and they were not all that surprised to find bigger effects in reading than that. So it looks like that special ed may be somewhat different, that we are finding at least some modest correlations between observable teacher credentials and the preparation teachers and student outcomes. Subject to all the caveats writ large in special education with selection issues and so forth. Well, then the so the second question we started with was, well, are there differences between traditional preparation programs? So most of the existing research seems to suggest there's not big differences on average between traditionally prepared teachers and alternatively certified teachers. But there still could be significant heterogeneity across schools of education. And as I mentioned, there's this big push now to have increased reporting requirements and ultimately have carrots and sticks on teacher prep programs that either measure up well or poorly based on these outcome measures. And this last paper is joint work with Dan McCaffrey and J.R. Lockwood and Kati Mahale at RAND. What we wanted to do is look at some of the measurement issues revolved around if you're going to use student achievement measures to gauge teacher preparation programs, what are some of the relevant issues and challenges. And can we really viably do that? So we have all the sort of usual problems you have when you're evaluating teachers or schools, and that test scores are noisy measures of student performance. And the problem is magnified in that you have relatively few graduates per program per year. So a large teacher prep program may churn out 100 plus graduates a year, but there are a lot of programs that churn out 25, 30 graduates a year. And then, only about a third, 40% maybe are going to be teaching in tested grades and subjects. So you're basing your evaluation of prep program on that maybe third of graduates that are teaching in tested grades and subjects. So even setting aside all those issues, there's an additional concern about trying to distinguish between the preparation program and the school the teacher ends up teaching. So hence the title, Where You Come From or Where You Go. That there's evidence suggests that teachers tend to stay either where they were prepared or maybe move back to their hometown. So we don't have an equal geographic distribution of teachers. Consequently, if graduates are tending to go to schools that are low performing for reasons other than factors in the control of the teacher, you may get a biased estimate of the impact of the preparation program. So a program is sending graduates to particularly challenging schools, they might look bad on a value-added measure just because the unmeasured characteristics the students are trying to instruct. And so the typical way to deal with that would be to include so-called school fixed effects in the model. So basically compare teachers from different preparation programs teaching in the same school. And then you'd have sort of an apples-to-apples comparison because they'd be teaching the same kinds of students. The problem then is that in order to identify the differences, you have to have graduates from different programs teaching in the same school. Or so if the University of Central Arkansas sent all their teacher preparation graduates to one school district, and the University of Arkansas sent all theirs to a different school district, you couldn't compare if you're trying to compare within schools. So we look at this issue of, well, how connected are the graduates of these programs? There's been some attempts to use these sorts of models to evaluate teacher prep programs in New York, Florida, Texas, and particularly Louisiana. They've been using this kind of approach heavily. So we look at, in Florida, 34 different preparation programs. They had ranged from 1 to over 500 graduates in tested grades and subjects. And their graduates were working in anywhere from one school to 271 different schools throughout the state. And we found that they, if we have a long enough window, so if we look at teachers over a 5-year span, most of them do have connections that Program A sent teachers to this school, and at least sometime over 5 years they overlapped with a teacher from another prep program. But nonetheless, we're concerned that, well, if we have this tendency to stay where you got your degree or where you grew up, that there may be geographic concentration that makes those connections weak. And so here's Florida. And the graph's a little fuzzy here, but those yellow boxes are teacher preparation programs. So you've got FSU up here, University of Florida, down there. You'll all agree with that, right? Orlando, University of Central Florida, University of South Florida, Tampa, etc. I'll see a number of colleges, universities down in the greater Miami area. And then little blue triangles are schools that their graduates teach in. And then these lines going across, the darker the line means the more people making that connection. So, not surprisingly, within the South Florida area, you have these schools sending, or these prep programs sending lots of teachers to schools in that area. FSU, a lot of people go to FSU, don't live in Tallahassee, so they end up teaching in the Panhandle. Some end up going back home to Miami area, etc. This just shows the further away, the less likely you're going to be teaching in school. That people tend to stay near where they were prepared. So what we find is no program has a direct tie to every other program. So there's no case where a preparation program has students teaching in schools that match up directly with every other program. But they're all connected, at least indirectly. So my program sends somebody to school A, there's also program B sends someone to school A, and then the second program also has people in some third schools. You can make those sort of indirect connections. So using lots of fancy network analysis, they're all connected. But 32% of program graduates teach in schools that employ only teachers from that prep program. So if you're going to include school effects, you're going to toss out a third of the graduates. So now, you start off, you're lumping off about 60% that don't teach in tested grade subjects. Then another third teach in schools where there's nobody from another prep program teaching. And so it greatly increases the variance and hence reduces the precision of the estimates we can get. And this just shows how much the standard errors get inflated. That the greater the percent of program graduates at schools with only one program being represented, the less precise your estimates are going to be. The other problem is, even if you have connections, if the people making those connections are not typical of the program, you've got a problem. So imagine your teacher preparation program mainly sends students to nearby schools, but the really good ones go far away. And those are the ones that make the connections with the other preparation programs in the state. Well, then your program's going to look especially good. Well, conversely, if it's your worst graduates that go far away and connect up with other programs because you're teaching in schools far away, that would make your program look worse. And not surprising, in Florida, most of the schools where these connections get made, they're schools that have teachers from different prep programs, are mostly in South Florida, largest metro area. And they tend to be schools that serve a high proportion of Hispanic students, immigrant students, limited English proficiency students. And the teachers who go to these schools are more likely to be minorities. So this shows the location of schools that can make the key connections between preparation programs. And lo and behold, they're mainly in metro areas. Jacksonville, Tampa, St. Pete, Miami, and so forth. And these are South Central schools. If you take those central schools out of the mix, so those schools where they're kind of seen to be key schools to connect up preparation programs, then it ends up that a lot of the preparation programs aren't connected. So what this fancy graph shows is basically you end up splitting programs into two groups, and you got one preparation program, the number 32 out there, that's kind of off in its own universe. And so we can no longer make comparisons across all programs.
So the reason why you're worried about this is because of non-random assignment of teachers to classrooms or schools.
Well, to schools, yeah.
Okay, and that you're worried that there will be unobserved factors that explain differences in the value added at different schools.
Correct.
Why weren't you equally concerned about these kinds of things in the previous paper that you were just presenting, right, where you're doing pathway analysis? Aren't those same issues present there?
We do include school fixed effects in several models.
Okay.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. That is a concern. That you might expect the alt-cert people to be teaching maybe in different kinds of schools. If you take a longer window for comparison, you're going to get more overlap between preparation program, graduates teaching the same school, but then it's less clear that the comparisons are valid. So if I'm looking at a graduate from the University of Florida in 2000 and comparing it to a graduate from the University of Central Florida in 2005, well, maybe those programs changed over time, and so we're no longer comparing the same programs as they currently exist. If you narrow that window, then you start to lose connections. Same result numbers here. So the good news is that we can estimate these things. There's enough overlap so you can control for the schools teachers end up teaching in, at least in Florida. I've talked to George Nolan in Louisiana. It turns out the big connector is LSU. So you've got a lot of regionalism with the other campuses. So folks that go to Northeast Louisiana tend to teach in Northeast Louisiana. But LSU graduates tend to kind of go all over. So they're what connect everybody up. But you can imagine states like here in Arkansas, you might have extreme regionalism such that you really can't make comparisons. The bad news, though, is that using school fixed effects makes our estimates less precise, and that the schools that are really central to making these connections may be atypical. So, alt-cert, generally no worse, maybe better, particularly in math. But traditional preparation seems to matter for special ed. Lots of problems if you want to try and distinguish the performance of graduates of different preparation programs. So it may be hard to know if one's better than the other.
I'm curious, I understand the rationale for looking at routes to teaching, but I didn't see where the input variable to all of these routes, which would be academic status of the potential teacher, was taken into account to begin with, because this is what the National Mathematics Advisory Panel found when it looked at the characteristics of effective teachers in relation to student achievement. The only variable that turned out to have some significance was teachers' knowledge of subject matter. And we understand that for most elementary teachers, mathematics is going to be, and science, among their weakest areas for knowledge of subject matter. So regardless of route, it would seem to me valuable to have at least one of these charts in which you start with the input variable to the different routes to see maybe there are math majors who only go, for the most part, to certain routes, because it gets lost when you start the way you have with your variables in the left-hand column. And I think we're missing a key effect. on student achievement, and especially if you don't then differentiate elementary from high school.
Right. So I agree completely that one way to evaluate teacher preparation programs is to say, let's look at their value add in the sense of controlling for the people that come in the door and the credentials they bring. Who's more effective at churning out good teachers? And by good teachers, we mean ones that seem to have positive effects on student achievement. So, if that's what we want to measure, you're absolutely right, that we should be controlling for whatever we can measure when they come in the door. Unfortunately, that's not much. Basically college entrance exam scores, there's not much else that we can collect data on, maybe high school GPA or something, but that's pretty...
Proxies used were courses as well as SAT verbal score. And there was a third one, but there were several proxies for academic competence or academic quality. In other words, teacher quality started with academic quality. So those would be the things that could be used, and that was the only significant correlation that was found.
Yeah, and other work I've done on teacher training in general, we didn't find any correlation between college entrance exam scores and later performance as a teacher. Now, I should be upfront about the data that in Florida, the only way we pick up college entrance exam scores is from their college transcript records. So for the most part, these are scores based on students entering as freshmen in four-year universities. And there are, we do have some data because of the Bright Future scholarships and some other tests they get for community colleges that would translate into SAT scores. But we don't have SAT scores in everything. And so the sample of teachers that we have scores for is far less than the total sample. But then, you can make the counterargument that maybe we should also be including the program's ability to attract good people to their program. In that case, then you wouldn't want to control for pre-program characteristics. If we say that, well, one of the things that college of ed should be doing is attracting good people into teaching. But I agree. I mean, that's something we'd like to take a look at is to what extent, if you control for their pre-program characteristics, do you see differences?
I just love this work. This is fascinating work. If I can suggest, there's sort of two schools of thought in education. One is we should prescribe everything. The other one is we really should let school level people make a lot of the decisions. And it seems to me a lot of your findings suggest that a buddy of mine who runs a charter school is right. He says, traditionally certified, audit certified, doesn't really matter. I'm looking for other things. It doesn't have any critical ability. It seems like your studies seem to be suggesting more or less right. We can maybe keep pursuing the variance this way or that way, but more or less. That said, let me ask you a couple of questions. You can respond or not respond. One is, alt-cert people outside of TFA tend to be older, right? Or do they? And does that have any impact?
We haven't looked specifically at age. Some, it's a mix. So some are second career, but there's a large proportion that of people that major in something else and decide for whatever reason, okay, I think I'll be teaching. And rather than go back and get a full major in education, they go on these alternative routes. So there's really, it's kind of bimodal. There's some second career people. I think the story of the retired IBM teacher teaching math, that's a pretty small number. That a lot of these are not much older than traditionally prepared teachers.
Second question, do the alt-cert people vary more in their characteristics like test scores? And there's one thing I've always suggested is that folks who don't go the traditional route are maybe a little bit represented among both the real high-performing and real low-performing students.
That's
Do they go a greater standard deviation?
Yeah, is there more heterogeneity? I don't know.
And are there student impacts in assessments more heterogeneous? I would suspect they would.
That would be interesting to look at. I mean, also, we're just looking at means here, but that would be interesting to see if there were more variance.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I'd be really curious to know.
You might expect more homogeneity from traditionally prepared teachers because, one, they're facing the same sort of entry requirements or entry costs. Whereas your old cert, I would guess is more heterogeneous, but that's certainly worth looking
I'll tell my buddy to maybe write this in.
Tim, I wonder if you would be persuaded by a sort of macro explanation for the entire pattern of results in all your studies. And that is that basically alternatively certified teachers tend to do somewhat better under circumstances where content knowledge trumps pedagogical skills. And traditionally certified teachers tend to do better under conditions that are the opposite, where pedagogical skills trump content knowledge.
i.e. special ed.
I.e. special ed, exactly.
No, I think that's a fair generalization. If you look at all these things together, it sure seems like where alt cert tends to do better is in the upper grades and more math and science. And like you said, where traditionally prepared teachers seem to do more pedagogy or being able to teach different learning styles and such, which is particularly important in special education, seems to matter. So I should point out too that there's been, it was quickly mentioned some of the work that's been done trying to look at value add with respect to teacher preparation. There's been some attempt to kind of get in the black boxes. Well, what is it about that makes a good preparation program? And it's very messy. It looks like if something matters, it's probably the clinical aspect. So programs that emphasize in-classroom experience before they finish the program, and particularly with appropriate supports, may be superior. That would be consistent with, we think we know that the first years of teaching experience matters. And if you essentially get some experience before you walk in the classroom.
Well, I was just going to make a couple of historical comments that follow up what you said. Probably we've been in the business same number of years.
By giving our hairstyles.
But if you go back 30 years, and because one of the points you made was, graduates from more competitive universities may have an advantage. The Home Sweeper Home Partnership was formed by AAU research universities that said we will never meet the teacher need. We will only prepare a subset of the teachers that's needed in all of our states. So their argument was, if we're AAU research universities, our research programs, our teacher prep program, should prepare a different kind of teacher at a different level. And Hank Hermanowitz, who was the dean at Penn State, and the other historical comment, he was the dean at Penn State, and he said, you never prepare a teacher in 4 years or 5 years. Because you prepare a teacher not only in the program, but also in the first years of teaching experience, which is the other point you were making. And so again, when you look at teacher, because again, back then the home group was essentially 5 years, and traditional programs were 4, and Hermanowitz was saying it's not 4 or 5. You've got to look at teacher prep, which was part of your comment on potential screening, but then also what happens when they gain experience out the program. So that way back then, but it really supports some of your, that thought was consistent with some of your findings today.
Well, and then, there's certainly, there seemed to be, considerable variation, at least at the extremes, in teacher preparation programs. So for those in the middle, part of the problem of trying to analyze them is there's not much difference. So like in Florida, I mentioned 34 prep programs. If we just look at kind of basic program requirements, there's not a whole lot of variation. partly based on NCATE. So, to get accreditation, they have to meet certain criteria, and so that tends to homogenize teacher prep programs. There are some exceptions, some schools that do things quite differently. And I think, just an aside, I think there's a challenge that teacher preparation programs are going to face, in that traditionally one of their big sources of students were existing teachers coming back to get master's degrees, because the salary premium for master's degrees. Well, that's going away in a lot of places. I mean, Florida passed legislation that prohibits districts from having salary bonuses based on advanced degrees, with the exception of advanced degrees in the content area. And so I think a lot of those programs are going to be under stress if they're relying on that as a large source of students. And some of these recent policy proposals that are going to be, like them or not, going to be applying some value-added type methods to analyze preparation programs. I think there's opportunities for colleges of education to be entrepreneurial and try different things. And I think business as usual is going to be problematic.
In the final analysis, I wasn't sure, but did you say that you were restricting it to only looking at certain grades when you were trying to find the connections?
Yeah, so there we were looking at elementary and middle schools. We were looking at, since we used like test score, we're basically looking at grades 4 through 8.
So there were schools that, from 4th grade to 8th grade, all the teachers had gone from the same program.
Yes.
Well,
I mean, we're only looking at recent graduates. Okay, so, think about it.
Well, and we're excluding the alts.
If you're a school in the Panhandle of Florida, you probably get folks from the University of West Florida for the most part, maybe some from FSU and Tallahassee, and you're not getting a lot of people, from the University of Miami coming to teach in Pensacola. And we're looking at relatively inexperienced teachers. So we're only looking at recent graduates that this school has hired. Maybe if they hire, 1 or 2 teachers a year, so over a span of, say 3 years, they've only made 6 hires. Probably 3 or 4 of them are not tested graded subjects. So the chance that 2 hires came from the same program, it's not bad.
Just one other quick comment. When you're looking at the preparation program, I think it would also be useful if those preparations on who accredits them. Because you mentioned NCATE, there is a certain, NCATE requires things to say. Some states you got to be accredited. A number of AAU research universities dropped out of NCATE when they were not required to be accredited by NCATE. There was a whole nother accreditation agency, DEAC, created to meet the needs of professional education schools that wanted to be able to do something quite different than what NCATE required. And so there are also different accreditations. Arkansas happens to be one you've got to be NCATE. So if you look at teacher prep programs here, they've all got to meet certain characteristics. They've all got to meet the standards of their society. So you look at English teachers, all of them have to do that. Math teachers all have to meet certain accommodations.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that in Florida it's another NCATE state. So
We are running out of time. I'm going to take the prerogative of the last question. That is the person I've got to introduce you. So I understand the reason we would want to do a school fixed effects. But as you mentioned, teachers might be attracted to certain programs because they know that it's a great program or whatever. So higher caliber people might go into the school. Similarly, we might expect that better programs are going to place teachers at certain types of schools, or that programs have a special emphasis to place teachers in a high-needs district or to place teachers wherever. So because of these types of focuses we might have at university, why not not do fixed effects, but do a model where you're just simply controlling for these other variables because we know that they're impacting the selection of where teachers are going to college and where they're going to teach.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is that many students don't travel far from home to go to college. So you say, well, was their choice to go to Central Arkansas rather than go to the University of Arkansas? Or was their choice to go to, University of Miami versus University of South Florida or something? But to the extent that people are constrained by other family ties or financial reasons for being close to home, should we hold that against the program because they're located in an area where most of the teachers are going to end up teaching in, say, high poverty schools? So you can see it both ways.
Well, thank you very much.